Previously on Patrick H. Willems.
This is Charles. Charles?
I can't take any more of this, man. I'm leaving.
Chloe is going to be our new cast member.
Can you make that happen?
Is this a joke?
All I know for sure is that Charles is alive and he is evil.
So any updates on what we talked about?
You know, you could just call me or text me. You don't have to show up here every day.
Yeah, but I want to keep you on your toes. So?
I'm still working on it. Look, is it even still gonna be a thing with the pandemic?
Dave the Agent, I don't like that attitude. It is going to happen.
Sure. While you're here, I got something I want to run past you. I've been looking at the numbers for the channel.
And they're great, right?
They're fine, I guess. Look, I don't understand this at all, but people really seem to love the coconut.
His name is Charles, and people don't love him. They're nuts for him.
The thing's testing off the charts in every demographic. Even women ages 18 to 34, and they don't usually like you at all. The pin sold out in 10 minutes, and I'm not one to pass up money, so I have an idea for you. Feast your eyes on this.
There are no words. They should have sent a poet. Dave the Agent?
Just Dave is fine.
We're gonna be rich. In my mission to dominate the landscape that is film YouTube, I have now dug into nostalgia and given my scorching hot takes about superhero movies. So the next step to really hook the audience is to make something personal, confessional. It's time to explore my past. Mom and Dad, I'm back.
Oh, hi, Pat. What are you doing here?
I'm just here for a couple days for a sentimental look at where I came from. Here, I brought you a gift.
Is this a painting of you?
Walking through my childhood home, it's like I've been transported into the past, back to my teenage years, when the future seemed so bright I had to put on a pair of sunglasses. There's the table I used to eat breakfast at, the stairs I fell down as a toddler, the desk I sat at for my talk show.
Pat, what's the big deal, man? You've only been gone 3 months.
The perfect thing to do here would be to meet up with some high school friends I've grown apart from. Some friends who never really grew up, whose jokes haven't aged very well. But we're hitting the second wave of a pandemic, so this isn't really possible. I guess I'll have to do the next best thing. Watch Kevin Smith movies. If you're a teenager right now, the idea that Kevin Smith was once an important filmmaker might seem totally insane. Yeah, the guy in the hockey jersey who won't shut up about smoking weed and shilling for every DC movie. When I was 17, I probably would have called him one of my favorite filmmakers. He even has a movie in the Criterion Collection. 20 years ago, Esquire magazine asked 5 critics to predict what new filmmaker would become the next Scorsese, and Andrew Saris chose Kevin Smith. I'm pretty sure I first became aware of Kevin Smith in the pages of Wizard magazine. Wizard, which is not around anymore, was the biggest magazine about American comic books. And as a kid interested in comics who had no idea what was going on in modern comics, I would sometimes use my allowance to buy a copy of Wizard, to immerse myself in this world I desperately wanted to know more about. And I kept seeing references to this guy named Kevin Smith. He was part of this new wave of filmmakers in the 90s, who launched their careers making small, scrappy, independent films that usually premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. These were people like Steven Soderbergh, Richard Linklater, Wes Anderson, Whit Stillman, Noah Baumbach, and Quentin Tarantino. A lot of these movies were clearly influenced by Woody Allen. They were light on plot, mostly about regular people hanging out, having long discussions in which they obsessed over inconsequential bullshit. Smith was a particularly notable success story, much like Robert Rodriguez around the same time. He self-financed a cheap black and white movie set at the convenience store he worked at, starring his friends. It was resourceful and creative and captured a very specific mood of that generation, Generation X. And it seems to launch an exciting new cinematic voice. And what was important to teenage me was that Smith was the only filmmaker targeting my specific interests. He made movies about comic book creators. Characters discussed the minutiae of Star Wars. He put Stan Lee in a movie, which was like a new thing back then. He owned his own comic book store. He wrote Daredevil for Marvel. Before I'd seen a single thing he'd made, this guy was my hero. This probably all seems lame and unremarkable now. Wow, movies referencing comic books and Star Wars? It's 2020 and we're all collectively rolling our eyes at Ready Player 2, so who gives a shit about Star Wars references anymore? But what you have to understand is that nerd culture was a really different place back then. As much as I still feel kind of weird about how this subculture has gone totally mainstream, I'll be the first to admit that it is way better now than it was back then. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, comic books were still deeply uncool. Nerd shit had not taken over Hollywood, it was lame and it was shameful. I had no one in school I could even talk to about this stuff, and I had to hide my interests for fear of relentless mockery, like swirlies and wedgies and the dreaded noogies. Actually, none of those things ever happened, but movies and TV taught me that they would. Now back then, most of us comic book nerds were straight white males from middle-class backgrounds, but we felt like a persecuted group. And so Kevin Smith became a kind of hero. Years before Seth Cohen made nerds cool, Smith was at least making them moderately respectable. If you wanted to watch that acclaimed new film you read about in the Times, it meant that you had to deal with a bunch of hyper-specific comic book information. And outside of the movies, Smith was the perfect representative for nerd culture. He was intelligent and eloquent while also being profane and crude and above all else, funny. I would rent and gladly watch the entirety of the 3-hour and 45-minute DVD, An Evening with Kevin Smith, which was just a collection of filmed speaking engagements where he told stories about being hired to write a Superman movie that never got made. And even today, I can acknowledge, it's a good story. Before the first X-Men movie and the first Spider-Man movie, there was Kevin Smith, making this uncool, nerdy shit that I loved seem actually socially acceptable and showing that sure, comic book fans might be weirdos in basements, but they were fun weirdos in basements. And in a move that obviously set our nerd brains on fire, he put all of his movies in a shared cinematic universe. Just like the MCU would decades later, he rewarded those of us who paid close attention, who caught that Allison's friend that she mentions in Chasing Amy is also Dante's ex-girlfriend from Clerks. Sure, these might just seem like goofy comedies, but there was lore, man. Continuity. It's all connected. Snoochie boochies. Walking through my parents' old barn, I'm thinking back to when Clerks 2 was released, just weeks before I left for my freshman year of college. An accidental moment of beautiful symbolism. It was the last Kevin Smith movie I would see in theaters, and the last time I would ever care that much. I watched it, I enjoyed it, and I haven't seen it since. In college, I majored in cinema studies. It's not like I immediately bought a beret and started worshiping Godard, although there was that one semester I started wearing bucket hats and got way too into Nancy Meyers' The Holiday. But the point is, I was introduced to a ton of new movies, I spent a ton of time studying film, and the result was that I broadened my taste. And I did have to watch a lot of Godard movies for class, but honestly, I was kinda lukewarm on them. It's not that I stopped liking Kevin Smith movies, It's that I stopped thinking about them. I don't think I revisited any of them in that 4-year span. I saw Zack and Miri Make a Porno when it came out on DVD, and I enjoyed it, even if it kind of felt like a lesser version of a Judd Apatow movie. And then came the Sundance Film Festival incident of 2011. I wasn't there, but I read about it. Here, clearly worked up over the poor box office performance of his recent movies and the negative critical reaction to his latest film, Cop Out, Smith pulled a weird publicity stunt. He held an auction for the distribution rights to his new movie, Red State, and then sold it to himself for $20. He announced that he would host screenings for his fans and charge $100 for tickets. He started a feud with the entire idea of movie critics and refused to let them see the movie, which seemed wildly hypocritical for a guy who used to talk about how much he valued critics, whose career launched because critics championed Clerks, who publicly thanked Matt Zoller Seitz for his reviews that inspired him to evolve as an artist and make Chasing Amy. On stage, in his custom hockey jersey, having gradually transformed physically into a cartoon version of himself, Kevin Smith was announcing that he would now refuse to engage with anyone outside of his cult-like legion of die-hard fans. And here I realized that I was no longer a member of that group. There was a time when I might have paid $100 to see his new movie and hear him talk, but that time had passed. With his podcast empire and speaking engagements and reality TV show, he had built a bubble for himself where he never had to be challenged and no longer had to appeal to a wider audience. Over the years, his constant self-deprecating comments about how bad he was at directing and visual storytelling,
I'm not a good director and blah, blah, blah,
had stopped being charming and become kind of pathetic. When he told a story about how Bruce Willis blew up at him on set for not knowing what the different lenses did, sure, Willis does seem like kind of an asshole, but he has a point. If you've been directing movies professionally for 15 years and still don't know the difference between different lenses, dude, that's just lazy and incompetent. It's crazy to think that this was the guy who Roger Ebert had once called one of the most talented writers in the movies today. And then, as the years went on, he kept making movies and kept recording podcasts and hosting TV specials, but it all seemed to be aimed at that hardcore group of fans. Kevin Smith the filmmaker had faded away and been replaced by Kevin Smith the personality. In 2016, when I was at San Diego Comic-Con, one day at the Hilton Bayfront Hotel, I ended up in the same elevator as Kevin Smith. Every other person in the elevator got a selfie with him, and I thought about how much I would be freaking out about this a decade earlier, but now I just didn't really care. Had I moved on? Had I lost the part of me that once cared about whether Ben Grimm's penis was made of rocks? I guess so. I will admit though, he seemed like a perfectly nice guy, and of course, he smelled like weed. But now I was curious. Do these movies hold up at all in 2020? Is there still a part of me that feels any connection to them? Are Jay and Silent Bob still funny? Well, I think it's time to find out. I rummaged through the attic until I found the box with all my old DVDs.
Patrick, can we give those old things to the library?
Not yet, Mum. Not yet. And for the full experience, I dug out the machine that I watched every one of these on back in high school. My old PlayStation 2. Then, I popped in disc 1 of my Clerks 10th Anniversary Edition DVD and pressed play. Okay, I changed into some more thematically appropriate clothes. So, do these movies hold up? For the most part, no, they don't. Watching these all again was such a weird experience. Not bad, occasionally fun, but mostly weird. It still feels justified to call Clerks a significant moment in the history of American independent film. It captures a very real feeling of being directionless in your early 20s and watching your peers move past you into real adulthood. There's that cynical Gen X vibe of not giving a shit, but here it's not cool, it's mostly just sad. The convenience store is a kind of purgatory, and by the end of the movie, The protagonists have cost themselves any chance of escape. Even the name of the store Dante works at, the Quick Stop, is the perfect subtext. For him, this job is supposed to be exactly that, a quick stop in life to figure things out before moving forward. But he ends up stuck there for years. This is the one movie where Smith's lack of filmmaking ability is a feature, not a bug. Without any of the glossy artifice we're used to from Hollywood movies, it feels almost like a documentary. Look, I know this is a cliche, but it does feel like we're just there hanging out with these characters. In all of his movies, Smith tends to shoot dialogue scenes in wide two-shots, mostly because he's bad at framing and blocking scenes, but this actually serves the material here and makes the comedy play better. This changes once he starts making movies with real budgets that look like, you know, movies. From here on, one of the biggest problems with Kevin Smith movies is Kevin Smith, the director. He seems to have no idea what to do with the camera, so he just drops it there while people speak. And it tends to feel artificial and stagey and makes his heightened verbose dialogue feel kind of fake. It feels like actors rehearsing a scene instead of an actual scene. There are plenty of movies consisting mostly of people talking in rooms that use the camera to add to the story. Smith's are not those movies. The script for Dogma is actually pretty good, and a real director could give it some real pacing and a sense of scale. In Smith's hands, it's fine. Snoogans. Of all Kevin Smith movies, Chasing Amy is the weirdest one to revisit in 2020. In 1997, this was a huge leap forward for him as a filmmaker. Mallrats, his first movie produced by a real studio, was just a goofy teen comedy, but Chasing Amy was a film. It's in the goddamn Criterion Collection. To refresh your memory, Chasing Amy is about a straight man named Holden McNeil who falls in love with a queer woman and, spoilers, ends up destroying their relationship because he cannot reconcile with her sexual history. It has not aged well. The sexual politics feel so dated now that a lot of the movie is just uncomfortable to watch. It's mostly about a dude who can't seem to understand how lesbians work, while his best friend just sits there yelling homophobic slurs. But also, this was the 90s. When this movie was made, Ellen DeGeneres hadn't even come out yet. It was rare to see a mainstream movie, especially one made by a 20-something straight male director, that actually took gay characters seriously and didn't just make them into broad stereotypes, that actually tried to accurately portray queer culture. But also, the main queer character doesn't actually have an arc in the movie. She's there to help a straight guy learn a lesson. This is a movie that was absolutely well-intentioned and represented a real effort by Smith to evolve as a filmmaker. Should we celebrate an artist for trying to be better even if they don't really succeed? I wouldn't say celebrate, but, you know, maybe give a supportive, respectful nod. None of these first 5 movies that make up the Willems universe, as it's called, are as good as I remember. Actually, only one of them is what I would call good. And yet, I don't dislike them. And really what that comes down to is the characters.
Fictional characters. Fictional characters.
Rewatching all of these movies, the characters do feel like old friends. Friends who make way too many gay jokes, but who I still think are kind of charming despite everything. I still think Jay and Silent Bob are pretty funny, especially in Dogma, where they spend the movie side by side with immortal beings and thus come off as dumber and more ineffectual than ever before. So there's a brief post-credits scene at the end of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, where Alanis Morissette reprises her role as God from Dogma and literally closes the book on the Wiskus. That was it. One last victory lap, and now Smith was gonna move on. He was done with the dumb stoner movies and dick jokes. He was going to leave behind all those crutches, all the stuff his fans expected, and he was going to make real movies now.
Why in God's name would I want to keep writing about characters whose central preoccupation is weed and dick and fart jokes. I mean, you gotta grow, man.
I think I'll probably wind up doing stuff like Chasing Amy, which is a mixture of comedic and the serious or the dramatic. Because that's the kind of stuff I'm really interested in. That's the kind of stuff I really dug.
In 2004, a sentimental comedic drama starring Ben Affleck, George Carlin, and Liv Tyler was released. It was Smith's 6th movie, and it was called Jersey Girl. Until today, I had never seen Jersey Girl. I remember wanting to see it in theaters because I was a Kevin Smith fan, but none of my friends would go with me, and then the reviews weren't great, so I just let it pass by. And then it became this punching bag, this movie Smith would make fun of as the low point of his career. So here is my big hot take. Jersey Girl is pretty good. In fact, it might be the best movie Kevin Smith has ever made. From the first minute of the movie, it's kind of shocking how much it feels like a real movie. There are actual shots. There are visual choices that enhance the storytelling. The movie feels like it actually has a director. Now, I think most of this is because of cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond, the same guy who shot The Deer Hunter, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Blowout. But even if he's the one responsible for all of these choices, Smith at least had the intelligence to hire him. Now, I don't want to make too big a deal out of this because Jersey Girl is not some kind of secret masterpiece. It's just a pretty good movie. In a lot of ways, it's the kind of formulaic thing that Hollywood has cranked out a million times. Spoilers, in the end, Ben Affleck decides not to go to the big fancy job interview so that he can rush home to make it to his daughter's school recital. There are plenty of hacky, dull versions of that trope, but this is a pretty good one. Because in this school recital, every single other kid in school performs Memory from Cats.
And now we have something not from Cats, thank God.
And then Ben Affleck and his daughter perform God That's Good from Sweeney Todd, complete with onstage throat slitting, and honestly, this scene kind of rules.
Exactly.
Jersey Girl felt like a good step forward, proof that Kevin Smith could make a solid Hollywood movie and write stories about real human beings that dealt with some real shit. There is actual drama in this movie. It gets dark sometimes, and it works. But then Jersey Girl flopped at the box office, so Kevin Smith turned right around and made Clerks 2. I'm not saying this is some great tragedy. I don't think we missed out on a bunch of Kevin Smith masterpieces, but I do think that he wanted to grow as a filmmaker and do different things. And the lesson that he took from this was to shut up and play the hits. And looking back, I think the failure of Jersey Girl is mostly because at that time, people were really sick of Ben Affleck, who was in that period of his career in the early 2000s where he was making like 3 bad movies a year. Like, this came right after Gigli. Kevin Smith has called Clerks 2 his best movie. But honestly, I think it's his worst. At least it's the worst of those first 7. I haven't seen Yoga Hosers, and I probably never will. When I was 18, and dumber, I was impressed because it seemed like Smith was maturing, dragging these characters into adulthood and making them reckon with real issues. But watching it now, I kinda had the opposite reaction. It's about these characters who have been stuck in the same place for over a decade, and instead of moving on, they just accept their fate and become the bosses of this small world that they can never seem to leave. Look, I know I'm the guy who loves finding subtext in movies that reflects the filmmaker's own lives, and I do it in like every video, but sometimes it's just right there. Kevin Smith tried to move on from the Wiskus universe movies. Jersey Girl was for him what moving to Florida is for Dante. And this movie is him accepting that he can never leave, that he'll just stay in his lane and be the ruler of this insular world only playing to his adoring fans. Clerks 2 is like an ode to mediocrity and a lack of ambition, and I just found it depressing. Plus, it's just uglier and meaner than his other movies, and not in a good way. And at this point, the gay jokes just become so fucking boring.
That very fucking gay look.
And for some reason, it's all shot with this bleach bypass, so it looks like three kings are Syriana. Like, hey, he's actually making a visual choice, but why this visual choice? But there is one piece of Kevin Smith media that does hold up, and it is Clerks, the animated series, which premiered on ABC in 2000 and was canceled after only 2 of its 6 episodes had aired. This show feels like a precursor to stuff like Community, that played with and commented on their form and the tropes of the genre. Like, the second episode of Clerks is a clip show, but since it's only the second episode, every flashback is just to the first episode, so they just keep flashing back to the same moments multiple times, and it gets funnier every time. And thanks to it being in animation and having actual animation directors, the show has well-executed visual comedy. Smith co-wrote the whole thing with David Mandel, who worked on Seinfeld and would go on to be a showrunner on Veep, and the whole thing is funnier, tighter, and more formally inventive than anything else Kevin Smith has ever made. So the lesson here is, Kevin Smith, maybe just write cartoons. Snooch to the nooch.
Hi, I'm Jay.
And I'm Silent Bob.
And I'm Charles Barkley.
What the hell are you doing here?
So I thought I was done. I had revisited all these movies I loved in high school. I finally caught up with Jersey Girl, which I'd always been kinda curious about. And overall, this had been a mostly disappointing but still pretty interesting experience. But the thing is, last year, Kevin Smith returned to the Willems universe. He got everyone back together for a movie called Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. And I had to find out what this thing was. So yesterday, I watched this long interview with Kevin Smith about this movie, where he talked about how each actor in it got involved. It was actually really sweet. He talked about reconnecting with Ben Affleck for the first time in years, how much he apparently loves working with Justin Long. The way he talked, there was so much love for the actors and for the process. He seemed to really care about this, and I actually got kind of excited to see it. Now that I've seen it, he didn't seem to care at all. The entire thing is just callbacks to moments from his other movies, which, as we've established, were not all that good in the first place. Like, half the jokes are just people saying lines they said 20 years ago.
And on that note, we cue the music. And on that note, we cue the music.
Matt. Matt. Kneel before Zod! Kneel before Zod!
Smells like somebody shit in their cereal.
Smells like somebody shit in their cereal.
I'll fuck anything that moves! I'll fuck anything that moves!
It's like Ready Player One, but only for Kevin Smith's filmography. Every scene is just, remember Brody? Remember movie Poop Shoot? Remember Moobies? Remember how this is Kevin Smith's wife? Remember how Kevin Smith once got removed from a flight for being overweight? Remember how he made a movie called Mallrats?
You gotta watch out for all the mall rats.
This is like the film equivalent of a former high school football player who's now middle-aged, who still wears his old jersey and falls asleep every night watching videos of his old games. If Clerks 2 was a sad look at people who can't move forward, this movie is like a celebration of refusing to grow up or improve at all. Every character is exactly where they were 20 years ago, but now they look even older than they actually are because the ugly digital cinematography and garish lighting makes every actor look like a gaunt corpse. There is one scene I enjoyed. It's the one where Jay and Silent Bob run into Holden McNeil, Ben Affleck's character from Chasing Amy. It functions as a nice epilogue to that movie, and Smith has the characters admit that that story always should have been told from a queer woman's perspective instead of a cis-het white guy. So that's actually pretty cool. And Affleck gets the one truly funny joke in the entire movie.
You're not Bruce Wayne anymore. You're Thomas Wayne. Or Bruce Wayne's mom, whose name escapes me.
But he still has to add one of those many annoying looks into the camera as if we're too dumb to get what he's doing. There's some emotional talk here about being a parent that works fairly well, but here's the thing. Smith already did this better in Jersey Girl. he had Ben Affleck learning this same lesson better in Jersey Girl. He did a wacky Jay and Silent Bob victory lap better in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and it wasn't even all that good the first time. He even did Star Wars references better in Jersey Girl. In that movie, when Gertie climbs into the passenger seat of the street sweeper and says, "Punch it, Chewie," it tells us that this is a shared pop culture reference that she and her dad bonded over. But in Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, when Justice starts talking about a galaxy far, far away,
in a galaxy far, far away,
you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
It doesn't do anything. It's not even a joke. It's just there because Kevin Smith apparently has a quota of Star Wars references he has to meet in every movie.
Dude, like Star Wars.
Now, I know this project came about after Smith himself almost died of a heart attack and wanted to have one more ride with his old friends. And it was a personal reward to his friend Jason Mewes for finally getting sober and sorting his life out. So the story behind it is very sweet and endearing, and I respect that. So it's a shame that the actual movie is just so fucking lazy and seems to be made by someone who doesn't really care. It's appropriate that the film ends with a dedication to the late Stan Lee, who Smith refers to as his mentor. After the 1960s, Lee's important work writing comics was behind him, and so he moved on, transforming himself into a kind of figurehead, a catchphrase-spouting cartoon version of himself.
Trust me, true believer.
And that's essentially what Kevin Smith has done. But no offense, Chasing Amy is no Fantastic Four. In 2020, these movies no longer mean much to me outside of some vague, lingering nostalgia. And I'm really curious if any current teenagers are discovering them and connecting with them the way I did. These movies used to feel special because no one else was doing what Kevin Smith was. I used to love the moment in Dogma where Silent Bob recreates the no ticket scene from Last Crusade.
No ticket.
But watching it now, there isn't even a joke there. He's just doing a scene from a better movie.
No ticket.
These kinds of references used to feel special, like if you got it, you were part of a secret club. But now, they just feel empty. The thing is, as time went on, we could get better versions of what Kevin Smith had been doing. Judd Apatow's movies seemed to pick up where Smith left off. Edgar Wright's whole career, starting with the television show Spaced, seemed to take the baton from Smith and just run with it. He had the nerdy references, but with actual filmmaking skill and something more to say. Wright also made movies about slackers in their 20s, but they were always about learning to accept responsibility and grow up, something Smith's characters, and Smith himself, refused to do. Plus, these filmmakers were pulling from a much deeper well of cinematic references. After rewatching all of these, I'm still not sure Kevin Smith has ever watched a movie that wasn't made by George Lucas.
This is my daughter, Millennium Falcon.
Snoogans. I put Kevin Smith in with the group that I call gateway filmmakers. These are the directors you discover in high school when you're first getting into movies and starting to recognize filmmakers with distinct styles and voices. Maybe you're interested in making movies yourself, so you're drawn to the ones who started out with self-funded indie movies made on tiny budgets. For me, this was Smith, but also people like Robert Rodriguez or Guy Ritchie. For me, Kevin Smith was a gateway to that generation of indie cinema, and an inspiration when I was getting into filmmaking myself. So even if the movies don't hold up, Smith still has a place in film history. Or at least my own personal film history. Okay, wait, I've been too harsh to a filmmaker who used to mean a lot to me. I want to end this video on a positive note. So here, in no particular order, are 5 things from Kevin Smith's movies that I still love. Hooper X, the black gay comic book writer who pretends to be a militant black rights activist to sell comics. He is the best part of Chasing Amy, and the "what's a Nubian" scene is still really funny. The Death Star conversation in Clerks is still the best pop culture reference in Smith's entire filmography. Jason Lee, whose acting career was launched by Smith's movies, is a joy to watch in all of them. even when he's playing a total piece of shit and like the avatar of toxic male nerd culture. The scene of Jay and Silent Bob tracking down all the internet commenters and beating them up is still perfect. And finally, the real lesson from this whole experience is that Ben Affleck has always been great, and that he and Kevin Smith bring out the best in each other.
Oh, Jesus, again, Ben?
No bullshit, because I wasn't with a hooker today. Ha ha!
Also, he was the bomb in Phantoms. Now, as we've talked about on the show before, nostalgia can be a very powerful thing. But sometimes nostalgia can only go so far. Sometimes it's better to leave those things we used to love in the past and not take them with us into adulthood.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, you know, I can think of many things from my teenage years that I've, gone back to check up on, and it's still fabulous. Take, for example, the Quicksilver Messenger service. Quicksilver had a record called Happy Trails, and it featured a one album side performance of Who Do You Love? It was recorded live, and rumor has it that they were tripping when they did this, which even puts it to example when the New Riders of the Purple Sage started to play with the Grateful Dead around the time of Working Man's Dead. Some of them appeared on...
Thanks, guys. I got everything I need. Another video in the can. Enjoy the plush, Charles. If you want another one, I can get you a 10% family discount.
I think we ought to move away and just not tell them.
Oh, stop.
No, we could go to New Zealand, get some sheep. You'll never find us.
But wait, there is one more thing I learned from watching all of these Kevin Smith movies: the art of self-promotion. No one is better at self-promotion than Kevin Smith. He even plugs his own comic book store in the end credits of all his movies. So now, it's the end of my video, so I'm going to plug my streaming platform. It's called Nebula. And if you're enjoying these videos here on YouTube, Nebula is like the expanded experience. That's where you can get the director's cuts, the uncensored version of Lindsay Ellis's Omegaverse video, the extended cuts of Legal Eagles videos, plus there are original series like Alex Goes Bananas, featuring me in the first episode, and even original podcasts like Low Spec Gamer's show Genesis, which explores the origin stories of different creators, featuring me in the first episode. But let me sweeten the deal. We've partnered with CuriosityStream, the great platform home to thousands of amazing documentaries, such as Soul on Ice, about one of Kevin Smith's favorite topics, hockey. And we've made a bundle. So now, if you just sign up for CuriosityStream at the link in the description, you'll get a bonus Nebula subscription for free. That's 2 for the price of 1. It's a hell of a deal. So what are you waiting for? Winter is here and you're gonna need stuff to watch while keeping warm inside. Snoochie You know what? No. I'm done with that. Goodbye, and thank you for watching. Okay, wait, there's one more thing I need to mention because it is so fucking weird. Kevin Smith's main collaborator is a man named Scott Mosier, who produced every one of his movies up through Zack and Miri and co-edited most of them. And then in 2018, he directed the animated Grinch movie, the one with Benedict Cumberbatch. What? How? What? How does that even happen? The guy had never even directed a movie before. I am so confused by this, and honestly, I just should have made this video about that instead.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, I can think of many things from my teenage years that I've, gone back to check up on, and it's still fabulous. Take, for example, the Quicksilver Messenger service. Quicksilver had a record called Happy Trails, and it featured a one album side performance of Who Do You Love? It was recorded live at Winterland in San Francisco. A lot of those psychedelic era bands, are very good and all, but I think Quicksilver stood head and shoulders above them because they could really control their instruments, especially in a live setting. They had two great guitar players, Gary Duncan and John Cipollina. And that was sort of a precursor to later musical acts where there were two really good guitar players playing off of one another. And these guys, were unbelievable. And there was the music, even though it was sort of a jam band approach, it followed a very strict form as opposed to similar things that like the Jefferson Airplane or more particularly the Grateful Dead were doing. And it's just fabulous. And this is a live recording, and rumor has it that they were tripping when they did this, which even puts it to a higher level. In fact, there was this kid who played in a band. I knew these guys in high school, and I won't mention his name. And he said he finally, through dint of hard practice, could play the whole John Cipollina part while he was tripping, And I actually heard it from another source, like a friend, years later, who I didn't know at the time of that performance, whose cousin was a good friend of David Freiberg, the bass player, and he confirmed that story third hand, that, they were really tripping when they recorded it. But I swear to God, like, I've gone back and listened to that every now and again, and it hasn't lost a bit. It still stands as an excellent musical piece. And I've even loaned it to friends of mine who are professional musicians just to demonstrate that, I swear to God, some of those like acid head, guys, they could really play. And I just say that Quicksilver, if you haven't heard him, check him out. But definitely go for Who Do You Love? The album is Happy Trails.
Dad, that was so much better than I ever hoped. And I think if it's cool with you, even though we're only going to use a piece of this in the main video, I'd love to just put the whole thing in, at the end.